Standing outside that little coffee shop in downtown Seattle, watching through the rain-streaked window, I felt my entire world tilt sideways. There was my husband of 18 years, holding hands across a small table with a beautiful young woman who couldn't have been older than 25. Her dark hair fell in waves past her shoulders. She wore a yellow sundress that reminded me of the one I'd worn on my honeymoon, and she was laughing at something Robert had said, her face bright with the kind of joy I hadn't seen in our house for months. I stood there in the drizzle, grocery bags heavy in my hands, trying to convince myself there was some innocent explanation. Maybe she was a colleague. Maybe she needed advice about something. Maybe they were discussing work over coffee like normal, professional people do. But then he leaned across the table and kissed her. Not a quick peck on the cheek or a friendly goodbye. A real kiss, full of tenderness and familiarity that spoke of months, maybe years, of secret meetings and stolen moments. My heart shattered right there on Fifth Avenue, surrounded by the sounds of traffic and rain and ordinary Tuesday afternoon life, continuing around me while my marriage died behind a coffee shop window. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came 30 seconds later, when the young woman turned toward the window and saw me standing there. Her face went pale. Her mouth opened in shock, and she whispered a single word that I could read on her lips, even through the glass. Mom. My name is Rebecca, and until that afternoon in the rain, I believed I had lived a fairly ordinary life. I grew up in Portland, met Robert during my junior year at Oregon State University, and married him 6 months after graduation. We were young and optimistic and completely convinced that love would be enough to carry us through whatever challenges life might bring. We moved to Seattle for Robert's job at an engineering firm. He was brilliant with structures, could look at a building and tell you exactly why it would stand or fall. I found work as a librarian at the university, surrounded by books and the peaceful rhythm of academic life. For the first 5 years, everything felt perfect. We lived in a small apartment, saved for a house, talked about the children we would have someday. We tried to have children for 3 years, month after month of hope and disappointment, doctor visits that revealed nothing wrong with either of us. When I turned 32, we stopped trying so hard. Robert threw himself deeper into his work, and I volunteered at the children's section of the library, reading stories to other people's kids and pretending my heart didn't break each time they called me Miss Rebecca instead of Mom. We moved to a bigger house in Ballard when Robert made partner at his firm. 3 bedrooms, a backyard with room for a swing set, a kitchen island where a family could gather for breakfast and homework, and the beautiful chaos of everyday life. But the house stayed quiet except for the sound of Robert's drafting table and my turning pages late into the evening. Robert started traveling more for work. Projects in Vancouver, consulting jobs in Portland, a 6-month assignment in San Francisco that kept him away for weeks at a time. I understood that his career was demanding, that successful engineers had to go where the work was. I supported his ambitions because that's what wives do for the people they love. But somewhere in all those years of empty bedrooms and business trips and quiet dinners for one, we lost the easy connection we used to share. Our conversations became about schedules and grocery lists and who would pick up the dry cleaning. We still said I love you every night, but the words felt automatic, like saying bless you after someone sneezes. 6 months ago, Robert started a new project downtown. Something about retrofitting older buildings to meet new earthquake standards. It was important work, he explained, the kind of thing that could save lives when the big quake finally hit the Pacific Northwest. He would be working closely with city planners and architects, spending long days in meetings and on-site inspections. He seemed happier during those months, more energetic when he came home, more talkative over dinner. He started buying new clothes, getting his hair cut more often, humming songs I didn't recognize while he showered. I thought it was because he enjoyed the work, because he felt useful and challenged in ways that routine projects couldn't provide. I was happy for him. After 18 years of marriage, I had learned to celebrate the things that brought joy to Robert's life, even when those things didn't directly include me. I should have paid more attention to the details. The way he checked his phone constantly during dinner, the new cologne that appeared in our bathroom, the weekend site visits that seemed to require an awful lot of preparation and nice clothes for inspecting construction zones. But I trusted him completely. In 18 years, Robert had never given me a reason not to trust him. He was steady and reliable and incapable of lying about anything more serious than surprise birthday parties. Until that Tuesday afternoon when I learned that everything I believed about my husband, my marriage, and my life was wrong. The changes started small. Robert began working later, coming home after 8 o'clock with apologies about traffic and meetings. He started taking phone calls in his study with the door closed, speaking in low voices about project timelines. I noticed he was dressing differently too. New shirts, expensive ties, shoes that looked European. When I complimented a nice jacket, he said it was a gift from his project team for all the extra hours. Our weekend routines changed. Robert started volunteering for Saturday site visits, emergency calls that required him to drive downtown on Sunday mornings. "I'm sorry, Becca," he would say, kissing my forehead. "This job is demanding right now, but the overtime pay will be worth it when we take that vacation to Italy." We had been talking about Italy for 5 years. There was always a reason to postpone: a big project, a family wedding, a roof repair. 3 months ago, I suggested joining him for lunch downtown. "That's sweet," Robert said, not looking up from his phone, "but my schedule is unpredictable. I wouldn't want you to come downtown just to have me cancel." His phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it and smiled, a quick private smile that disappeared when he noticed I was watching. "Work?" I asked. "Yeah, just project updates." But I had seen Robert's work messages over the years. They were dry and technical. The message that made him smile had been short and ended with a heart emoji. I told myself I was being paranoid. Robert worked with lots of people, including younger colleagues who used emojis in professional communication. Maybe it was someone's birthday. Maybe they had hit an important project milestone. Maybe I was looking for problems that didn't exist because our marriage had become so routine that I couldn't imagine anyone finding Robert exciting enough to flirt with. 2 weeks after that conversation, I found a receipt in Robert's jacket pocket while I was taking clothes to the dry cleaner. Dinner for 2 at an expensive restaurant in Capitol Hill. The kind of place with cloth napkins and wine pairings and prices that made my librarian's salary seem like pocket change. The date on the receipt was from a Thursday night when Robert had told me he was working late on budget revisions. He had come home at 10 o'clock with Chinese takeout and complaints about having to eat dinner at his desk again. I stood in our bedroom, holding the receipt and trying to think of innocent explanations. Maybe he had taken a client to dinner. Maybe it was a work celebration that he forgot to mention. Maybe the receipt was from weeks ago and he had simply forgotten to throw it away. But the date was clear, and so was the itemized list. 2 dinners, 2 glasses of wine, 1 dessert to share. The kind of intimate meal that couples order when they're celebrating something private and special. That night, I asked Robert about his day. "Exhausting," he said, loosening his tie. "Spent 4 hours going over budget numbers with the city planning office. Had to grab dinner at my desk again." He looked me straight in the eyes as he said it. No hesitation, no guilt, no sign that he was doing anything other than sharing the mundane details of a routine workday. I had never seen Robert lie before. I didn't even know he was capable of it. But there he was, describing a completely different evening than the one documented on the receipt in my jewelry box, and his voice was as steady and sincere as it had ever been. That's when I realized that everything I thought I knew about my husband might be wrong. The following Tuesday, I decided to do something I had never done in 18 years of marriage. I decided to check up on my husband. I left the library early, telling my supervisor I had a dentist appointment. Instead of taking the bus home to Ballard, I caught the route that went downtown to Robert's office building. I wasn't sure what I planned to do: confront him, follow him, demand explanations. I just knew I couldn't spend another evening pretending to believe his stories about working late. The November rain was coming down hard by the time I reached the business district. I pulled my hood up and walked toward Robert's building, feeling like a detective in a movie I didn't want to be starring in. I waited across the street for 20 minutes before I saw him come out the front entrance. He was wearing the new gray coat I had complimented the week before, carrying his briefcase in one hand and an umbrella in the other. But instead of walking toward the bus stop or the parking garage, he turned south on Fifth Avenue. I followed him for 3 blocks, staying far enough behind to avoid being seen but close enough to track his movements. He walked with purpose, like someone heading to an appointment rather than wandering aimlessly through the rain. He stopped in front of a small coffee shop called Luna's Cafe. Through the window, I could see warm light and people gathered around small tables, the kind of neighborhood place that served oversized muffins and locally roasted coffee. Robert checked his watch, straightened his coat, and went inside. I stood across the street, rain dripping off my hood, and watched him scan the room like he was looking for someone specific. Then he smiled, the same private smile I had seen when he read text messages at home, and walked toward a table in the corner. That's when I saw her for the first time. The young woman with dark hair and the yellow sundress sitting alone with a cup of coffee and what looked like a notebook spread out in front of her. She stood up when she saw Robert, and they embraced like people who had been apart for longer than a single workday. I moved closer to the window, using a bus stop shelter to hide behind while I tried to understand what I was seeing. They sat down across from each other, and I could see them talking intently, leaning forward like they were sharing secrets or making plans. She was beautiful in the way that 25-year-olds are beautiful without trying. Clear skin, bright eyes, the kind of effortless elegance that comes from youth and confidence. She wore simple jewelry, small earrings, a delicate necklace that caught the cafe's warm light when she moved. Robert was animated in a way I hadn't seen in years. He gestured while he talked, laughed at things she said, reached across the table to touch her hand when she seemed upset about something. He looked like the man I had fallen in love with in college. Before, mortgages and failed pregnancies and the weight of ordinary disappointments had settled on his shoulders. They sat together for 45 minutes. I watched them through the rain, my feet growing cold in my soaked shoes, my heart breaking with each gentle touch and shared smile. This wasn't a business meeting or a mentoring session. This was a love affair, complete and intimate and devastating. Finally, Robert looked at his watch and said something that made her nod reluctantly. They gathered their things, and he helped her with her coat like a gentleman. Like the way he used to help me with my coat when we were young and still impressed each other with small acts of courtesy. They stood by their table for a moment, talking quietly. Then Robert looked around the cafe, checking to see if anyone was watching, and leaned down to kiss her. Not a quick goodbye kiss, a real kiss, full of longing and tenderness, and the kind of love that makes people forget they're in a public place. Her hand came up to touch his face, and for a moment they looked like characters in a romantic movie, beautiful and perfect, and completely absorbed in each other. When they broke apart, she turned toward the window, probably to check if the rain had stopped, and saw me standing there under the bus shelter. Our eyes met through the glass. She went completely still, her face draining of color as she realized who I must be. Her mouth formed a single word that I could read clearly despite the distance and the rain. Mom! The word hit me like a physical blow. Mom, not ma'am or excuse me or oh no. Mom. This beautiful young woman who was kissing my husband, who was having an affair that was destroying my marriage, who was young enough to be my daughter, she was calling me Mom. Robert turned to see what had startled her, and his face went through a series of expressions I had never seen before. Shock, guilt, panic, and finally something that looked almost like relief, like a man who had been holding his breath for months and could finally exhale. I stood there in the rain, grocery bags in my hands and my entire life crumbling around me, trying to process what I was seeing. The affair was horrible enough. But Mom, how could this stranger, this other woman, this person who was destroying my marriage, how could she possibly know to call me Mom? And then, in a moment of terrible clarity, I understood. The timing of Robert's business trips, the new clothes and the changed demeanor, the way he had been happier these past few months, more energetic and alive than he had been in years, but most of all, the receipt from the expensive restaurant, the date, exactly 9 months after Robert's last business trip to Portland, the city where I grew up, the city where, 26 years ago, I had given birth to a daughter I never got to hold. The adoption had been closed. That was the agreement I signed when I was 19 years old, scared and alone and convinced that giving my baby to a family who could provide everything I couldn't was the most loving thing I could do. I was a sophomore at Portland Community College, working 2 part-time jobs and living in a studio apartment that barely had room for one person, let alone a baby. The father was a boy from my biology class who disappeared the moment I told him I was pregnant. I had no family support, no money, no idea how to raise a child when I was still figuring out how to be an adult myself. The adoption agency assured me it was for the best. They showed me profiles of loving families who had been waiting for years to give a child everything I couldn't provide: stable homes, financial security, married parents who had room in their hearts and their lives for the baby I was carrying. I chose a couple from Seattle. He was an engineer, she was a teacher. They loved hiking and camping and wanted to raise their children to appreciate the outdoors. They seemed perfect. Responsible, kind, exactly the kind of parents every child deserved. I never knew their names. That was part of the closed adoption agreement. No contact, no updates, no way for either of us to find each other unless something went catastrophically wrong. The baby would grow up knowing she was adopted, but not knowing anything about me except what I chose to share through the agency. I wrote her a letter before she was born. 3 pages about how much I already loved her, how difficult this decision was, how I hoped someday she would understand that I gave her away because I loved her too much to keep her in a life that couldn't give her what she deserved. The adoption counselor promised the letter would be given to her when she turned 18, along with my first name and a few basic details about my family medical history. Just enough information to satisfy curiosity without opening doors that were meant to stay closed. After the birth, I transferred to Oregon State to finish my degree. I threw myself into my studies, graduated with honors, met Robert during my junior year. I told him about the baby on our 3rd date, certain that no man would want to marry someone who had given away a child. But Robert held my hands and told me I was brave, that I had made an impossible decision with grace and selflessness. He said it made him love me more, not less. We never talked about it again after that night, but I always felt like he understood that part of my heart would forever belong to a daughter I would never see again. Now, standing in the rain outside Luna's cafe, I realized that Robert had found her. Somehow, some way, he had tracked down the daughter I gave away and built a relationship with her that had grown into something I couldn't have imagined in my worst nightmares. My phone buzzed with a text message from Robert. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up." I looked through the coffee shop window and watched him help my daughter. Our daughter? His daughter? Into her coat. They were both looking at me now, their faces pale and serious. I could see them talking, probably trying to figure out what to do next, how to handle the fact that their secret was no longer secret. I turned and walked away before either of them could come outside to face me. I wasn't ready for explanations or confrontations or whatever conversation this situation required. I needed time to think, to process, to figure out how my life had become something I no longer recognized. I rode the bus home to Ballard in silence, staring out the window at the city where I had lived for 18 years, without knowing that my daughter was growing up just a few miles away. All those years of wondering where she was, whether she was happy, whether her adoptive family had given her the good life I couldn't provide. And she had been right here, probably passing me on the street, or shopping in the same stores, or sitting in the same coffee shops. And somehow, she had found Robert, or he had found her. and instead of bringing her home to meet me, instead of reuniting the family that had been broken apart by necessity and youth and impossible circumstances, he had chosen to start an affair with the daughter I had never stopped loving. That evening, I sat at our kitchen table and tried to make sense of what I had discovered. Robert came home at 10 o'clock with his usual apologies about working late. He looked tired and stressed, but he also looked guilty in a way that was completely new. "How was your day?" he asked, hanging his coat in the hall closet. "Interesting," I said. "I left work early, went downtown." He froze with his hand still on the coat hanger. "Oh?" "I saw you at Luna's Cafe." Robert closed his eyes and leaned his forehead against the closet door. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The kitchen clock ticked loudly, marking seconds that felt like hours. "How long have you known?" I asked finally. He turned around to face me, his face pale but resigned. "About you being her birth mother? 3 months? About wanting to meet her? Almost a year." "How did you find her?" "I hired a private investigator." He sat down across from me at the table where we had shared thousands of meals, where we had discussed our days and our dreams and our disappointments. I knew her birth date, the adoption agency you used, a few other details from what you told me years ago. It took him 6 months to track her down. "Why?" The word came out as a whisper. "Because I could see how much you missed her. Every year on her birthday, every Mother's Day, every time we saw families with children. You tried to hide it, but I knew. I thought maybe if I could find her, if I could see that she was okay, I could give you some peace. So you decided to have an affair with her instead?" Robert put his head in his hands. "That's not how it started, Becca. I swear to you, that's not what I intended." "Then tell me how it started. Tell me how you went from wanting to help me find my daughter to kissing her in coffee shops while lying to me about working late." Robert's story unfolded slowly, painfully. He told me about hiring the private investigator, about learning that Sarah had grown up in Tacoma, about discovering that her adoptive parents had died when she was 16, that she had spent her teenage years in foster care. He told me about seeing her for the first time, working as a waitress near the University of Washington where she studied art therapy. How beautiful she was, how much she looked like me at that age. "I just wanted to see her," Robert said, tears streaming. "Just once to know she was okay." But Sarah had noticed him watching, had approached to ask if everything was all right, and when she looked at him closely, she had said, "You have kind eyes. You remind me of someone." He started going back to the restaurant then twice a week. He learned about her studies, her dreams of helping children, her struggles to pay for college while working 2 jobs. "I told myself I was just being kind," Robert said, "like a mentor. She didn't have anyone else." The help started small. Robert picked up her check when she couldn't afford lunch. He gave her rides when her car broke down. He listened when she talked about missing her adoptive parents, about wondering about her birth parents. That's when Robert should have told her the truth, should have brought her home to meet me. Instead, he fell in love with her. Not romantically at first, he insisted. He fell in love with her kindness, her resilience, her determination despite all her losses. The emotional affair lasted 6 months before it became physical. Sarah had failed an exam, been evicted, called Robert in tears. He went to comfort her, and somehow it became something else. "You kissed my daughter," I said. "I kissed a young woman who needed someone to tell her she was worth loving," Robert replied. "In that moment, she wasn't your daughter. She was just Sarah, and she was beautiful and broken." "But you knew who she was." "Yes," Robert whispered. "I knew." The affair had continued for 3 months. Robert told me about the secret meals, the text messages, the weekend visits disguised as work emergencies. He told me about how guilty he felt, but also how alive Sarah made him feel, how much she appreciated things that I had long since started taking for granted. "She thought I was single," Robert said. "I told her I was divorced, that I lived alone. I couldn't figure out how to explain that I was married to her birth mother without explaining everything else. So you chose to lie to both of us instead." "I chose to be a coward," Robert said. I chose the easy path instead of the right path, and I know there's no excuse for that." We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of 18 years of marriage pressing down on us, along with the knowledge that everything had changed. Robert had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible, but he had also given me the one thing I had wanted most in the world, the chance to know my daughter. "What happens now?" I asked. "I don't know," Robert said. "Sarah thinks you hate her. She saw you outside the cafe and recognized you immediately. She said you looked exactly like the woman she had always imagined when she thought about her birth mother. She's devastated that her relationship with me has hurt you." "Does she know that you're married to me?" "I told her tonight. After you left, I told her everything. Who you are, how we met, how much I love you, how badly I've screwed up everything." Robert wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "She said she wants to meet you properly if you're willing. She said she's wanted to find you her whole life, but she never had the courage." I thought about the daughter I had given away 26 years ago, the baby I had held for exactly 10 minutes before the adoption counselor took her to her new family, the child I had wondered about every single day since then, hoping she was happy, hoping she was loved, hoping someday she would understand why I couldn't keep her. Now she was 26 years old, studying to help other children who had been hurt by circumstances beyond their control. She was beautiful and kind and struggling to build a good life despite losing everyone who had ever taken care of her. And through the worst possible combination of coincidence and betrayal, she had found her way back to me. "I want to meet her," I said. "But Robert, what you did, I don't know if I can forgive that. You didn't just cheat on me. You cheated on me with my daughter." "I know," he said, "and I'll understand if you can't get past it. But Becca, she needs you. She's been alone for so long, and she needs her mother." "She needs a mother," I corrected. "I don't know if that's me anymore. I'm not the 19-year-old girl who gave birth to her. I'm a 45-year-old woman whose husband fell in love with someone young enough to be his daughter." "She is my daughter," Robert said quietly, "in every way that matters. I know that sounds crazy, but these past few months, helping her and caring about her and wanting the best for her, that's what being a parent feels like, isn't it?" I looked at my husband, this man I had loved for 20 years, who had broken my heart in the most complicated way possible. He was right, and that made everything harder. He had fallen in love with Sarah the way a father falls in love with a daughter, but he had expressed that love in completely inappropriate ways because he didn't know how to navigate the impossible situation he had created. "We need counseling," I said. "All of us, together and separately. This is too big and too complicated for us to figure out on our own." "Will you meet her?" Robert asked. I thought about the letter I had written 26 years ago, the one that was supposed to be given to her when she turned 18. I still remembered every word. How much I loved her, how difficult it was to let her go, how I hoped someday she would understand. "Yes," I said, "I'll meet her. But not as your girlfriend, Robert, as my daughter." 3 weeks later, we met at a different coffee shop in a different part of town. Sarah was even more beautiful in person, with eyes that were exactly like mine and a smile that reminded me of my mother. She was nervous, apologetic, heartbroken about the affair, desperate to make amends for something that wasn't really her fault. "I'm sorry," she said as soon as we sat down. "I'm so sorry about everything. If I had known you were married, if I had known Robert was your husband, I never would have—" "You have nothing to apologize for," I told her. "You didn't know. Robert should have told you the truth from the beginning." We talked for 3 hours that first day, about her childhood, her adoptive parents, the years in foster care that I couldn't bear to think about my decision to place her for adoption, about how much I had missed her, about the letter I wrote that somehow never reached her. She cried when I told her about the letter, about how I had thought about her every birthday and holiday. She said she had always wondered if I loved her or if I just saw her as a problem to be solved. "I loved you so much that I gave you away," I told her. That was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I thought it was the most loving thing, too. Sarah and I meet for coffee every Tuesday now. Sometimes Robert joins us, but usually it's just the two of us, trying to build a relationship that should have started 26 years ago. We talk about her studies, her dreams, the children she hopes to help someday. I tell her stories about her birth father, about my family, about the grandmother she'll never meet who would have adored her. Robert and I are in marriage counseling. Some days I think we'll make it through this, and other days I think the betrayal is too big to overcome. But we're trying. Because Sarah needs both of us now, and we need to figure out how to be her parents without destroying each other in the process. The hardest part is learning to forgive Robert not just for the affair, but for robbing us of the chance to reunite properly. Sarah and I should have met with joy and celebration, not with shock and betrayal. We should have had the beautiful reunion I had imagined for 26 years, not this complicated mess of love and guilt and inappropriate relationships. But maybe that's just how life works sometimes. Maybe the most important things come to us through the most unexpected and painful paths. Maybe the daughter I thought I had lost forever needed to find her way back to me through heartbreak, because that's the only way any of us knew how to find each other. Sarah is studying art therapy because she wants to help children who have been hurt by adults who were supposed to protect them. She understands trauma in ways that most people never will, and she's using that understanding to help others heal. I think about that when I'm angry with Robert, when I'm tempted to let bitterness poison what could be a beautiful second chance with my daughter. Sarah has spent her whole life healing from wounds that other people inflicted. I don't want to add to those wounds by refusing to forgive the man who brought her back to me, even if he did it in the worst possible way. Love, I'm learning, is more complicated than I thought when I was 19 years old and making impossible decisions about my daughter's future. It's messier and more painful and more forgiving than I ever imagined. But it's also stronger than betrayal, deeper than hurt, more persistent than time. My daughter came back to me through rain and secrets, and the kind of love that doesn't follow any rules. That's not the story I would have written for us, but it's the story we got. And maybe, with enough time and grace and forgiveness, it can still have a beautiful ending.